Hi guys, welcome to the Earthy Delights podcast. Today we spoke to Umar Kankiya from Dope Black Dads. We spoke to Umar about being a black father bringing up children in Britain. We talk about the complexity of bringing up children in a mixed faith household and how both their British culture and Nigerian heritage are sources of great pride. Umar tells us about the difficulty of always being put in a box and not living up to black stereotypes of what a man should be. We also spoke about the brotherhood fostered in Dope Black Dads, which is a community of black fathers who help support each other emotionally and mentally. It was such an interesting conversation and gave us, and we hope gives you, an insight into some of the many difficulties of being a black member of society in Britain today. We loved having Umar on the podcast, and it was great to hear about all the aims and aspirations of Dope Black Dads, as well as what they've already achieved today. So without further ado, here is Umar. Umar, welcome to the Earthy Delights. Thank you so much for coming on. What's the crack? How are we doing?
Yeah, all good, guys. Thanks for having me, Seb. Thanks for having me, Jim. I'm tired, man. It's just been a crazy 24 hours. It's half term here as well. We're on a 2-week half term as well. So my daughter's already been off for a week, but her and my son are currently at my mother-in-law's house, so they're staying there for the night. So me and my wife can just chill, get on with other bits of work and stuff. But for them to have a nice night away and be spoiled by grandma. So yeah,
lovely.
All good though. All good.
Good stuff.
Umar, I wanted to ask just quickly, was this the first time you've been asked what's the crack? Because I thought I heard in a recent episode of Dope Black Dads the host asking someone what's the crack, and I just needed to confirm it or not.
No, it's not actually, because funnily enough, and I'll speak it very quietly because, well, actually, no, she knows anyway. But yeah, my ex-girlfriend is actually from Northern Ireland, so I think it's from like a decade ago we're talking about. So yeah, so what's the crack was very much part and parcel in my vocabulary for a long period of time. So not the first time I've heard it, Jim.
Okay. That's great.
Beautiful stuff.
Had to do my proper research. That's all.
There you go. Well, Jim can now whack out all sorts of Irish vocabulary now. He's going to have the confidence. He's probably going to try and test you.
Bring it on.
Umar, before we get going, and I'm really looking forward to this one. It's one that I've Jim and I've got a lot of questions that we want to ask you. But before we get going, anyone who isn't kind of aware of you or what you do, could you just tell us a bit about yourself and a bit about Dope Black Dads, how it kind of all started and what you're all about, really?
Yeah, so a bit about me. So my name's Umar. I'm 35 years old. I'm married to my wonderful wife, Comfort. I've got 2 children, Talia, who's 5, Xavier, who's 2.5. What I do by trade, I'm actually a qualified lawyer. So I've been qualified now for 8 years, practicing in England. I was predominantly been practicing in the field of mental health, so representing people who've been detained under the Mental Health Act here in England and Wales. But more recently, I've been doing a lot more work around mental capacity work, so dealing with lasting powers of attorney, enduring powers of attorney, so people that making decisions and having attorneys appointed to deal with their finances or their health and welfare should they lose their capacity. Alongside of that, I also, so I still do a bit of mental health, predominantly doing the LPA mental capacity stuff. I also teach, I lecture part-time at the University of Winchester, so I'm teaching sports and the law to the 2nd and 3rd years there. So I've been doing that for the last couple of months. And I'm also a member of Dope Black Dads, and I have been now for the last 18 months. Dope Black Dads basically was set up by a guy called Marvin Harrison. So he established this back in Father's Day 2018. So he had kind of been feeling a bit low about fatherhood, parenthood. And on Father's Day, it kind of really compounded for him. So he sent out a text to a number of dads that he knew, black dads that he knew. And, suddenly they were kind of sharing similar feelings, similar sentiments. And Dope Black Dads was born. And the whole ethos and premise behind Dope Black Dads is very much to educate, to inspire, to heal, and to celebrate black fathers. And really, it's about changing the narrative of what it means to be a black father, because a lot of times people will see black fathers as being absent, as being non-present in their children's lives. That's the perception that's been created of what it means to be a black father. What we're saying is actually that is very much a minority view that's being held up as a majority, but the majority are actually people who are law-abiding, who are professionals in their own right, who are making waves in their local communities and far beyond, and actually are very much present and alive to the fact that they have got children and they are playing a very active role in their lives and trying to change the narrative behind what it means to be a Black father.
I mean, that's great. And I mean, it's great. I know that you're achieving a lot of that anyway, because you've gone so far. It was only 2 years is ridiculous, really, because you've achieved so much in such a short time. So it's kind of a big inspiration for a podcast like ours and stuff, which is fairly a bit of a baby at the moment. So, I mean, it's great to see the good work that you're doing. You touched on it there, and there is a really negative stereotype about that's kind of portrayed in the media, be it films or be it the news or the print press, about like the absence of Black fathers. Do you believe there's any truth to that whatsoever? And if you do think there is any truth, what do you think can be done to kind of to reverse that or to stop that or to change that?
I don't think there is truth to that. And I think it's a case of how parenting was viewed maybe 30, 40 years ago versus where we are now. So I think a lot of times, and I'm speaking from somebody who is Nigerian, got Nigerian heritage, but born here in the UK. And it was very much a case of my parents came over, first generation Nigerians coming over in the 80s. I know lots of friends who've got parents that came over in the Windrush generation. And very much was about for them trying to establish themselves in this country. So their absence was very much not because they didn't want to be present. And I don't think that was the case. It was very much like they're trying to establish themselves. They're trying to work hard, trying to create opportunities for their children to be able to kind of carve out a much better life for themselves than what they've been able to do. So I think what you tend to see is very much like, this whole notion of Black fathers going around sowing their seeds, having all these children, not really being present. But actually, that's very much a minority view. And, I maintain that it has been a minority view. But sadly, it's very easy to kind of demonize and glamorize that and make it seem like that is the majority of Black fathers and Black people generally. And even when you look at how media portray a lot of Black people anyway, over the years, if you're a Black male, especially living in London, the statistics around stop and search and, how much more frequent you are likely to be stopped by police for being Black. And this kind of stems back to the sus laws that were used in the 70s and the 80s before the Police and Criminal Evidence Act came in. And that changed the whole way that policing was to be viewed. And obviously you had the murder of Stephen Lawrence and the changes that came along from that. So I think for Black people, we've always kind of been fighting against the tide somewhat. We're trying to change some kind of a narrative and a perception, which I think is really interesting because ultimately people that came over from the Windrush generation in 48, they were the ones who were told and were actively recruited by the British to come over to this country and help build up our NHS, help build up the transport and rail system. So I'm not sure at what juncture did it go from, you're here to help us and help make the country rebound from the Second World War and do really great things, to you guys are drug addicts, you're absent fathers, you're criminals. So, I don't get where that dichotomy has occurred in the intervening years.
Yeah, it is an interesting one because, like you say, it's portrayed so much in the media. And then I feel like whenever there is the odd example where it reaffirms the stereotype, then that's always been, oh, look at that guy. Here he is, typical, whatever there may be. And it just reaffirms that stereotype, which may, like you said, isn't really proportionate to Black fathers in general. But yeah, you have a one or two negative kind of stories and then that's it, all tarnished with the same brush.
Yeah, and I think it's easy for people to just, to run with that because, it takes work to try and find out and understand more what's going on in a community, especially if it's a community that is alien to you. And, you just feel like, well, I don't need to bother with that. And that's where I think with Dope Black Dads, as I said, we're all about changing the narrative. And actually, we're not saying that we're going to wait for people to come and learn about, what Black fathers are doing. We're actually saying, listen, we're just going to kick the door down and tell you this is what we're doing. This is what we're about. And I think that's what's kind of sparked its growth over the last couple of years, is the fact that we have been in people's faces. We haven't been afraid to kind of talk about our stories. And I think we've not been afraid to be quite vulnerable and alive to the fact that, yes, there are these stereotypes that are there, but let's park those to one side and let's really get deeper about some of the issues and experiences that we have as Black fathers. We're talking about trauma. We're talking about kind of childhood trauma that's been passed on from our parents in terms of their own experiences and how that impacted on us growing up, and how we're trying to avoid doing the same to our children and kind of trying to break that cycle, whether it's going for therapy to kind of address those particular issues. So we're not afraid to have those challenging conversations. And I think it's quite refreshing for people to see that actually, we're not being closed off to that. And, we're being quite open, and, we're more than happy to talk about our experiences in that way.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Like you said, the word they're refreshing. And one thing I think that's really refreshing about Dope Black Dads, forget that it's about Black dads for a moment, and let's just talk about fatherhood. I love the way how you celebrate fatherhood.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that's really missed in society just in general, be that Black, white, Asian, or whatever minority you may come from. We always, whenever there's a child is being born, or we talk about family or whatever, we always celebrate the mothers, and rightly so, but we always talk about motherhood, how beautiful it is to be pregnant, and that whole process. And it's always seen, whilst we're now trying to change the narrative of whether fathers are providers or not, or whatever the circumstance, we never really include fatherhood in the beauty of family. And in bringing up a child, and celebrating fatherhood, and what a beautiful thing that obviously I'm not a father myself, but like as a son of a father, I hope he would say the same, of like what a beautiful thing it can be to be a father. And I that's what I find really refreshing about Dope Black Dads. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that we as a society celebrate motherhood and yet we completely overlook fatherhood?
I think it kind of is born out of the societal structures that we've had for so long, and it's been ingrained in our cultures and in our systems. I think it's always been very much like mothers, their role is to bear the children, to raise the children, they go off. Dads, men, your role is to, it kind of goes back to the whole caveman time, the hunter-gatherer type of thing. So, you go find the food, you provide for your family. So I think that ideal has just manifested itself in different ways over the years. And now we're at the stage where it's very much like, well, actually, we can't rely on those stereotypes anymore. We are talking about equality. We're trying to make sure that there's equal access to everything for everyone. So therefore, mothers are, or women generally are more career minded these days. They are more kind of inspired about wanting to excel in different fields, and rightfully so. And I think that's kind of shifted that focus somewhat. And it's interesting as well. What I find is, well, obviously we've been dealing with the pandemic this year in 2020, and there were studies about how dads suddenly were kind of having to do more, or actually starting to realize more about what their wives do. And actually we did a thing in Father's Day this year where we kind of said, let's take an hour each day, add an extra hour to what we're doing, and that will help to kind of lessen the load, because that is the equivalent of mums being able to not maybe doing 2 or 3 hours worth of stuff. And I think it was very interesting kind of through the pandemic as a dad. I mean, I've always been pretty much an active father from day one, and actually I remember it was a bit of a battle between myself and my mother-in-law, because I think she had not experienced seeing somebody who wanted to really be kind of involved in everything and kind of wanted to be part of that decision-making process and wanting to be quite hands-on. Because, I often hear stories about dads who've never changed a nappy before, but I was just like, right, this is it. And, I'm getting to get involved. And for me, being a father, parenthood isn't about, okay, let's have children, and then suddenly it's for my wife to deal with everything. That's not what it's about. For me, it's about us working together as a team. My wife is successful in her own right. She's a government lawyer. She does amazing work herself. And, it's not about me saying, well, okay, you need to put your career on hold and look after these children that we've brought into the world together while I go off and do stuff. No, it's actually about, okay, we're a team, we're a partnership. How can we work together so that we both can achieve what we want to achieve in our respective fields, but also bringing up our children in the way that we want to bring them up as well. So I feel like that narrative is definitely shifted. And like you say, I think generally with fatherhood, I think people now are starting to kind of recognize a bit more. But I still think we've got a long, long way to go, because I think people still do hold that perception that fathers are there to just kind of provide. And I think for some dads to feel like it's enough if I'm making X amount of money every year, we're living in a nice house, you're going to nice schools, you've got all these nice things. And for a while, actually, I used to have that slight mentality, because I was kind of a bit old school in terms of, this is how I was brought up, in terms of, like, from my dad was very much saying, when you're a dad, this is what you need to do. And actually, I've had a shift in the last year or so. It's like, actually, that's not what it's about. And you need to kind of be a lot more present to your family and kind of be a lot more present to what you're doing, because otherwise the whole world will pass you by. And you're like, well, you don't really have a relationship with your children as such, and it's very much a material thing rather than an emotional bond between them, and that's kind of what we're trying to get away from.
Umar, I just wanted to ask, you mentioned the narrative has changed, which I have just from an outsider, I would agree with, but I'm pretty sure there's only 2 or maybe 4 countries, I know Sweden is one of them, that have equal time for paternity and maternity leave. And I was just wondering, from your point of view, even since you've become a father, have you seen a progression within the workplace in terms of their attitude towards facilitating this crucial stage for the child's development?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've been fortunate, because when my daughter was born, my eldest, so she was born prematurely, so she was 6 weeks premature, and I remember, my paternity leave started, but they were very understanding about, letting me have a bit more time off to kind of, obviously manage that whole situation, because it was a bit of a traumatic time of it. And I do think that workplaces are slowly starting to kind of recognize that a bit more. And I think it's more about fathers maybe taking a lot more of the initiative and saying, these are my expectations. And I was very, very clear, in past jobs where I've been like, I've got kids. So I've got a daughter, I like to take her to school. I've got a son, I like to take him to nursery. So for me, work needs to fit around that. I mean, I'm happy, maybe a couple of times a week if I obviously have to stick to a strict routine. It is what it is. And obviously, my wife being able to do the drop off and pickups as well. But my children are part of my life. So therefore, my work needs to kind of fit around that. And again, this pandemic has been amazing, because it's cut out the need to commute to work. It cut out the need to kind of have that rushy feeling that you have in the mornings. And I was saying this to a couple of dads the other day at the school gates, just how liberating it is to be able to work from home. Yes, for 6 months it was crazy, because you're trying to work whilst managing homeschooling and everything else that comes along, managing your emotions and mental health and whatnot. But since my kids have gone back into childcare and school in September, it's been a revelation, because it's like, you get up in the mornings and no longer am I having to think about, okay, I need to get up an hour before you guys because I need to get ready and make sure that I'm all set, get all your stuff ready, and then, have that mad dash of, okay, let's get you to the nursery, drop you to school, drop the car back, run to the station to get a train at a specific time, to get into the office, or, go see a client, do what you need to do. And then you're thinking about, you get to midday and you're like, okay, well, I need to be out by 3:34 because I need to get on this train to get back to pick them up. Now it's just very much like, okay, well, I'm up at like 6. Well, that's a lie, because I don't ever get up at 6. It's usually about 4:30 or 5. I'll get up, I'll go for my run, I'll come back, get the kids up, shower, get them changed, breakfast, and it's all just like calm. And it's just, you're just like, you're moving along at a nice pace, and it doesn't have that rushy feeling to it. So for me personally, I mean, it's, once this pandemic is over, then, I'm quite happy for it to continue in this way, because I feel like it's allowed me to really be able to spend more time with my kids in the mornings, doing even basic things like being able to do more reading with my daughter in the mornings, doing more activities in the evening when they get back home. And you're not having this constant pressure of, you're clock watching all the time. So yeah, I think employers definitely in the pandemic have had to adapt a lot more than probably ever before.
Yeah, I think it's been a really good like reset button in that, and allow people to kind of get their priorities straight and really see what it is that they value, and then work around that rather than it being the other way around and trying to incorporate things that we value into the work system or whatever it may be. Before we bring up talk in depth about how you bring up your kids, because I really want to get into that, but before we do, I just wanted to ask you, we had like a call a couple of weeks beforehand. And you gave us like some really nice stories about how Dope Black Dads supports each other, and how you're a community of men who support each other in the hard times, whether that just be a conversation, whether that be financially or whatever it may be. Could you just kind of, people who don't know, kind of give us maybe a few stories or a few examples of how it is that you help each other, not just talking about the kids, but how you help each other as fathers to get through if there's ever a difficult time?
I think one of the beauty of with Dope Black Dads, we've got a WhatsApp group where we've got about 175 people in that group alone. There's a Facebook group which has got a few thousand in there. And I think what's great is if people have an issue, they will just raise it. So it may be a case of, I'm having this particular issue with my son or my daughter. I don't know how to approach it, help type of thing. And then people will kind of chime in and give their own experiences or their own examples, and then kind of, you can work through it in that way. I think the good thing about Dope Black Dads is it's not like a set age range that we have. So it's not like we're all dads who are, between 30 and 40. We've got dads who are in their 20s, we've got dads in their 30s, up to dads that are in their 60s, 70s. So it's such a wide range of experiences that you have. And I think what's good as well is, the fact that we're able to challenge each other and kind of change people's perceptions and views. So, there might be those, views about, whether it's how you punish your children, how you speak to them and kind of approaching those things. But away from parenting, we've had a lot of shares where people will kind of speak about their own personal vulnerabilities, whether it's around their own mental health, whether they are, if they're struggling. Like for me, for example, I was diagnosed with reactive depression last summer in July of 2019. And at that point, I'd shared it with the group, and people were very supportive and kind of encouraging and, telling me ways to manage it, and kind of encouraging about, the use of therapy to kind of explore things in a lot more detail. And actually, we really value as a group the concept of therapy itself, because we think it's so important to be able to understand where you are right now and how you kind of got there. Because there's a lot of childhood trauma that doesn't often get talked about. There's a lot of things that have happened in your childhood, which, you kind of look back and you're like, okay, this will explain why I behave in this way as an adult. And it's not until you go through that process that you kind of recognize, okay, so this experience or this happening to me is what has led to me behaving in this particular way. So for me, definitely, like I found during the pandemic, I've done therapy myself, and I was really able to kind of understand a lot of why, certain things had happened and why certain things were happening, and kind of understanding that in a lot more greater detail. And for me, it just means that when others have that similar type of situations, you're able to kind of speak from first-hand experience and say, yeah, okay, my therapist worked for me, but I'm not saying that it's going to work for everyone, but at least explore that concept and have that understanding. Because I think until you do that, you do tend to bury a lot of that childhood trauma, and then it just manifests itself in the way that you parent, in the way that you deal with certain situations, which is not really good.
Yeah, I think it's commendable, because I think, a lot of most parents, to be honest, they were all brought up obviously in a different generation. Of course they were, and so they were brought up when different norms were accepted. And I think a lot of, my dad was very strict with me when I was younger, and as I've got older, the relationship has got more kind of loving and on a friendship thing. But when I was younger, it was definitely brought up on a respect level, rather than and that was because, and my excuse was always, oh well, he's a man of his generation, he's a man of his era. Whereas I think the move to do therapy to stop those ripple effects at your level and not allow them to kind of seep into your kids is a really commendable thing. That said, there's something that I wanted to question, which is, one thing is being, for example, my dad being an Italian man and so on and so forth, maybe having a very strict parent and whatever, being strict with me or not being strict, this, that, and the other. The other thing is, you said before, you spoke about how you didn't want, your parents and their parents would have had gone through, traumatic events, especially moving here if they were in the Rinroth generation or even later. And your generation now is trying to stop that happening for your kids, and trying to stop passing on that trauma. I wonder how do you kind of tally? So my question is, how do you bring up 2 black children in England, which is still a predominantly white country? How do you bring them up and prepare them for ultimately, I mean, we'd love to imagine that we will, in 5 years we'll be in utopia and racism doesn't exist. But I think we all know, unfortunately, that it will still be here. And they will probably experience it in some form or another in their lifetime. How do you prepare them for that? And at the same time, allow them to maintain a certain level of curiosity and a sense of possibility, and not feel as if, the cards are completely stacked against me. Like, my dad's telling me that, like, people are gonna maybe in job offers or whatever look at me and because of my name or because of my skin color not hire me. So how do you kind of tally that balance and make them still really think, you know what, the world is my oyster, but it's my oyster with a few barriers, which I now have the tools thanks to my parents to overcome?
Yeah, I think, I feel like for me and my wife, definitely, we're examples of people that have been able to overcome that. We're both in decent professions. We're both doing, good work, and, we're both kind of community minded in how we approach things. And I think for us, it's very much, we don't want to kind of create this situation where we're just telling our kids, you need to look out for the white man, like he's out to type of thing. But it's also about trying to understand that sometimes things will probably happen, and when it does, it's kind of, I suppose, exploring it almost on a case by case basis. But I think for us, it's very much about raising them to recognize and love and appreciate their identity, who they are, their background, where they come from. Both me and my wife were Nigerian. I'm from the north. My wife is from the south. I'm Muslim. She's Christian. So my kids already, they've got 2 different cultures that are there in them already. So they've got the Hausa culture, the north, the Islamic side of things. They've got the Yoruba culture, the Christian side of things. So it's about them kind of being able to embrace and understand both sides to their family, both sides to their upbringing. And it's through that where we're able to kind of have those types of conversations and just be like, okay, cool, this is what you're about. We celebrate Eid in the same way that we celebrate Christmas. We recognize, Easter, all of that kind of stuff. And it's just very much about, okay, this is all part of who you are. And it's also recognizing, we are living in England, we live in Essex, and it's like, not saying that you're going to be an Essex boy or an Essex girl, but, this is where this is where you're growing up. This is who you are. This is all part of your identity. So it's just very much about kind of recognizing that it's a big melting pot. But when things do happen, it's also about having those conversations in the most appropriate way possible. Like, funny enough, this morning, my daughter was like, oh, I know it's Black History Month because they've been learning about it in school. But we don't ever hear anything outside of that, or, all we ever hear about is white people all the time. And, all we ever hear about is like white stories. So I was like, okay, well, there are, lots of Black stories out there. There's a thing called Tata Story Time, which is out on YouTube. And it's very much about kind of different actors reading like Black orientated books, which my kids absolutely love. And I saw there was a thing on Netflix as well called Black Stories. Again, it was kind of like people like Common, Tiffany Haddish were reading stories. And it's just very much like explaining to them, there are Black authors that are out there, and kind of showing it to them and kind of encouraging them and, just making them feel aware and, making sure that they feel connected to their roots and, not feeling in that way. Fortunately, I'd have to, I'd say that, none of my kids have experienced that level of, we haven't really experienced any kind of racism yet. I'm not saying it's never going to happen because, I think it's inevitable that it will. But when it does happen, then obviously it's a bridge that we will, get to. But it's always about having those conversations and kind of, I suppose, preparing the ground so that when things do happen, it's like we have that open dialogue to be able to talk about it and explore and try and move on from it.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine how hard it must be to try and prepare your kids for something that, like you said, thankfully yet hasn't happened, but almost inevitably will be.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's definitely not an easy one. I mean, you spoke about the cultures there, and we spoke before on the phone about Nigerian culture. I'm lucky enough to have grown up with Nigerian and Nigerian people and have like some really good Nigerian friends, and it's just a beautiful culture. But one thing that they would express to me is how sometimes it could be seen as some parts of the culture, I should say, were quite antiquated. And I know you kind of tallied that as well with, the thought process behind jobs, for example, where traditionally speaking anyway, where, it's like engineer, lawyer, doctor, those kind of prestigious jobs as opposed to the more creative side of things and so on. And I wonder it's kind of a two-part question. One is, how do you kind of bring them up to maybe be slightly or to not feel like they have to have this pressure of the traditional Nigerian culture and live up to I know you're a lawyer yourself, but not feel like they have to be a lawyer, for example, to be classed as a success in their parents' eyes. And then secondly, how do you bring them up to be both proud to be British and proud to be Nigerian at the same time?
Yeah, so I think in relation to the first one, it's very much a case of, right now we're just kind of like exploring, seeing what they are interested in. Like my daughter, she loves music, she loves dancing. My son is quite creative, he likes to draw and that kind of stuff. So it seems, well, I suppose they're 5 and 2.5, so anything can happen between now and then. I think for me and my wife, it's very much about we're letting them explore their creativity. My daughter, she does ballet, she does gymnastics, she's doing all those type of things, so kind of opening her eyes up to different things. And my son's playing football at the moment, not been able to do much more than that because of the pandemic, but hopefully when the pandemic starts to calm down, we'll be able to introduce him to more things as well. And it's very much just kind of exploring all of that and seeing what they are interested in. And I think for us, it's very much, get a degree, something that that's transferable, but we're not saying that, you have to, just because mommy and daddy are both lawyers doesn't mean, you need to become a lawyer or a doctor or an engineer too.
Family trade.
Yeah. So, but also I think it's like, it's so different now because there are so many other ways in which a person can be successful without being in those kind of prestigious jobs anymore. With the internet and social media, the way that's kind of opened up the world generally, I can understand from our parents' generation, them growing up, it's like they've come to this country and it's very much like, okay, in order to be successful, you need to be a barrister or a solicitor. You need to be, the chief consultant at a medical hospital. Now it's like, well, people are successful as YouTube influencers or, Instagram influencers and stuff. I'm not saying that I'm saying, that's what I want my kids to do. But if it's something that they excel at and they're doing really well, I'm not going to be neither myself or my wife are going to be like, well, no, you can't do that because it's not a traditional role. So we're very much about encouraging them. When it comes to the whole British and Nigerian side of it, again, it's very much about embracing both sides of it. So, you're born here, you're both born in London, you're Londoners to start off with, this is where you're at. And you kind of embrace that side of things, embracing everything that is about Western culture, but never forgetting what your roots are and what your heritage is. And again, how we do that is kind of celebrating Nigerian culture, whether that's through the clothes that we wear, the food that we eat at home, even down to like language, how that's spoken, and kind of trying to teach our children speak Yoruba, speak Hausa, so that they feel very much connected to the culture. And, my daughter knows she's Nigerian. She recognizes that, she understands it. She loves her jollof rice. She loves her rice and stew. Even when I left them with the grandma, a couple of hours ago, that's what they were having for their lunch. So, it's very much like it's not a foreign concept to them. And we're taking active steps to ensure that they know that this is their culture, they know that this is their heritage, and to kind of embrace that and never kind of forget that, no matter where they are in the world.
I feel like sometimes we spoke about this before, didn't we? That sometimes it can be almost like not a lost battle, but you kind of never one fully or the other. I'm like, I respect you, but I'm like, obviously in England, all of my friends will refer to me as the Italian friend, and then I go over to Italy to see my Italian family, and I'm the English cousin. And it's like, it doesn't matter where I am, I'm always one or the other. And I think you said that the same when you went to Nigeria. You were like, oh, here's the English here's the English coming over to visit.
Yeah, because even it's weird because I speak Hausa fluently because I grew up, speaking it at home and stuff. And even though sometimes it's funny because people will look at me and they'll start maybe saying stuff or cussing me, thinking that I understand exactly what they're saying. And then when I speak back to them, it's like, oh, okay, I shouldn't have perhaps said that. It's weird because, some family members will see you as the rich English guy because apparently it grows on trees here. Whereas over here, I'm like, nah, don't get me wrong, we're living comfortably, but I'm not by any stretch of the imagination rich or have six figures or anything like that. So it can be a bit of a nightmare kind of straddling that. And it always, whenever I go back to Nigeria, there's always that adjustment, those first few days when you're there and you're kind of like you're adjusting, and it's not you're adjusting because you feel like an alien in the country. I always feel comfortable there because growing up, I used to go there at least every couple of years. So, by the time I was 16, I'd probably gone to Nigeria at least 7 or 8 times in my lifetime. So it was never about that, but it's just more about kind of, okay, I'm not in London anymore, and just kind of readapted to being in a small village. And kind of, for me, the alien part of it is like, okay, I don't have access to fiber broadband right now, or the network is a bit dodgy, or electricity isn't going to be on all the time. That's what the adjustment is. But in terms of everything else, it's like, well, no, these are my people, so I don't ever feel like I don't belong in any way, shape or form. So it's an interesting one, to say the least.
It's really interesting because the one thing that I really found interesting and different about the Nigerian culture compared to, say, Western cultures is the aspect of Hansa, Yoruba and Igbo, and the tribal nature of it, and how the way that some people act or maybe slightly talk or eat even can, oh, he's Igbo, oh, that person does that, oh yeah, typical Igbo or typical Yoruba or whatever else. And it's interesting that that you've, like you said, your hands and your wife's Yoruba, and so you've got Muslim and Christianity in the same household. And I was wondering, how do you bring up your kids with, because normally the argument nowadays is like even in a religious household is, do you bring up your kids indoctrinated into the kind of family religion, or do you allow them to discover that slowly and surely, and maybe they never will do, maybe they never find the faith or want faith? But with you, how do you kind of teach them both sides of it? Do you just go really laissez-faire and just go, you know what, if they want to find more about Islam or Christianity, they can ask us, and if they're not interested in it, then we'll let them go how they want to go? How does that work?
Yeah, so we definitely teach them about it because I think it's important. I pray 5 times a day, so my kids will see me, and I make a point of making sure that when I'm praying, they see me praying.
Right.
When the churches were open, we had a community church, so my wife would go with them, and I would come along as well. So it's kind of very much like we're trying to teach them that yes, we're different religions, although they both come from the Abrahamic faith, so it's kind of very similar in that respect. But it's very much about daddy believes in God, mommy believes in God. We just pray and we worship in different ways, and it's very much about my kids understand about, well, my daughter certainly understands about Ramadan because she'll see me when I'm fasting, and she knows about Ramadan because she knows that Eid follows, and Eid means present. Getting together. And also like her cousins, like on my wife's side, so my wife's sister, she converted into Islam before she got married, actually. So there's that influence is already there as well, in terms of like my brother-in-law and my sister-in-law, so their daughters are Muslim, so there's also that kind of curiosity. And we just we teach them about it, and obviously with Christmas and Easter, they very much are aware about it. And I think for them, yeah, they recognize they're two different faiths. Definitely for my daughter, she does understand and she recognizes that they are two separate faiths. And I think ultimately our goal, our aim is to, we're teaching them about it, and it's for them to kind of make a decision. I know there'll probably be Muslims being like, "You're a bad Muslim, Umar," because it should be like, traditionally, it should be like your family's raised in the man's faith. But I kind of take a very view that I feel, with my kids, because they are, they've got both sides, so you can explore it, and they've got relatives on both sides. So it's very much a case of, it's not just at home. So they know when they go to one house, it's like the Muslim, like it's Muslim, but it's not even that different generally. So it's not like you go to one house and it's very strict Muslim, no TV, nothing, whatever. And then you go to another house, it's like quite liberal or whatever. It's nothing like that. So I think because of that, they're able to kind of see that and kind of understand them as they grow older. I'm sure there'll be more questions that are asked, and it's up for it's for them to decide. And I've got no qualms whichever way they decide to go, and I'm sure it's the same for my wife as well.
Sorry.
Go on, Jim, go on.
It's nice to hear you say that, because when Seb asked this question, I understand the dynamic of the question, because we often hear of the split sides between these religions. But as you said, there are so many similarities as well. Key similarities of that. We believe in something bigger. We believe in like self-discipline to make ourselves better in terms of these acts or rituals. And there's obviously there is differences, but like really there's no reason why you couldn't live in grow up appreciating both, I think it's just
100%. Yeah, I agree. And I think it's it's sad because obviously I know there's been lots of wars in the past over kind of religion and my religion's better than your religion type of thing. But I think for us, it's we're not trying to. It's not a competition. We pray in different ways. We both believe in God. We just kind of believe in a different way of doing things, and that's absolutely fine. And I remember actually, funnily enough, because I think like for my parents, they were very much like, nah, doesn't work. And I think it was kind of like, it's a generational thing, because they would have seen like Muslims and Christians getting married and then maybe separating after a few years because it just, for whatever reason, it didn't work. But I think we live in a much more tolerant, much more open society now where, that is very much, religion in some cases, I can recognize, some people will be, part of the thing that holds them together is the fact that they're both religious and, they will raise their household in a particular way, whether it's in a Islamic way or in a Christian way. And I completely get that. But the world is also quite progressive and recognizes actually, interfaith marriages do exist. They do work. And I remember even at our wedding, because we got married, we've been married for, it'll be 6 years in December. We've been together for 9 years. So, we've kind of shattered those illusions in terms of Muslim can't stay together. All that nonsense that old school people tend to have around that. And we had like an interfaith minister. So, she kind of did part of our ceremony in a way that kind of reflected both of our religions. So it was kind of demonstrating to the whole world that actually, you can have these differences, but it's these differences is what brought us together in the first place. And, it should be celebrated rather than kind of admonished.
For sure. I totally agree with you. I also wanted to ask, has your faith changed, or how has it changed since you've become a father? Because I know for a lot of people of faith, there's usually like ebbs and flows, and there's usually some sort of questioning period, and then there's usually a big event in someone's life, and then it kind of trajects them back into. I was wondering, did this change for you, whether it was when you got married or when you had your first child? Or
to be honest with you, I'd say faith for me is probably changed more in the last year or so.
Okay.
To be honest with you, like I've always had an interesting relationship with religion. I think like my sisters have been my sisters and my mum and dad supremely religious. I kind of rebelled against it a little bit when I was in my formative years. Not that, I've never drank alcohol, so it wasn't like I was rebelling in that way. But it was just kind of like really questioning, is this really real? Does this really exist? this is, what is this religion flex? And I still identified as a Muslim. I still did Ramadan and, celebrated Eid and stuff, but I was kind of questioning it. I suppose probably in the last year, I've really kind of taken a very different mantra, because I kind of felt, again, with my depression diagnoses, I kind of felt like I'm almost wandering through life a bit aimlessly. And, what is my purpose? Yeah, I've got my children and I've got my wife, but I'm identifying myself as a Muslim, but I'm not really doing that properly. Like, I do Ramadan and I observe that for 30 days, no problem. But then for the rest of the time, it's like, well, what are you doing? Mm-hmm. And I kind of really questioned myself, and then, started praying a lot more, and kind of started praying and doing 5 times a day again, and kind of asking for things, and, kind of praying for forgiveness, praying for new opportunities to arise. And actually, I feel like through that, I have started to get new opportunities. I do feel like I have been getting forgiveness, and it's kind of strengthened my resolve in that in a funny way. So it's, well, not even in a funny way, but it's just kind of really strengthened my resolve in that. And actually, you know what? Yeah, I'm not going to mess around with this anymore, because I think it does work, that the power of prayer is powerful. I'm not going to turn this into like a preaching session. To me personally, this is what I've kind of experienced, and I do really kind of believe in that. So yeah, I just kind of like, I run with it now. And I observe 5 times a day prayers. I don't miss them. I make sure I get up first thing in the morning. It was like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning during the summer months, to get up and pray, and make sure I do, the other 4 at various points of the day. So to me, it's been more maybe in the last year that it's kind of really deepened. And I don't know whether it's because I'm getting older as well now, because I'm 35, so kind of on the fast track to 40. And I suppose it's like, yeah, you've got kids, you've got wife, you've got family, you've got job. What is your purpose? Aside from all of that, what is kind of your wider purpose in life? So I think having that recognition and understanding that a bit more now has definitely deepened my resolve in it.
You spoke about the generational kind of changes in mentality towards religion and growing up in a certain religion or whatnot. And one of the key things that I realized, if I was to compare my Nigerian friends to my white friends, be that Italian, be that Irish, be that English, whatever it may be, is that almost all of my white friends, even if they were brought up, I was brought up in a Catholic environment, as you can imagine, being Italian. I'm pretty sure Jim was as well, in Ireland in some sense. And then we kind of, a lot of the white people, we kind of just eventually, a lot of us go, nah, I'm all right, thanks. I'll find my spirituality or faith or whatever it may be in a different way. I think a big thing to do with that is, I remember I went once to a Pentecostal church with my friend Michael. Shout out Michael if he's listening. And I thought it was a joke when he took me, because I've never seen anything like it. And to me, it wasn't what church was, because it was 2,000 people. I thought he was taking me to a concert or something. I thought he was winding me up. And it was 2,000 people. And then when we went there was dancing, there was action, there was real a sense of life. Whereas when I would go to my Catholic whatever, you would go there and sometimes it was hard to stay awake. It really was. This was the complete opposite. I think my parents, even though, like I say, they're Catholics, but they weren't really believers. We went and they even decided to be reborn as Pentecostalists, and then they had the father came out, and it was a whole thing. And I was like, wow, this is the difference, I guess. But one of the things I understand is that my Nigerian friends, like you said, sometimes there's ebbs and flows, and when they were maybe younger, sometimes they wouldn't kind of follow it as religiously or so on and so forth. But it always stayed with them, and they always had a faith, and they were very clear on it. And if anything good ever happened, they would always thank Jesus and everything else. And I wondered if, because it's so ingrained in the culture, so every Sunday you go to mass and this, that, and the other, and that's where you meet everyone in the church and this, that, and the other. I wonder if they even have if it's even a possibility for them to renounce religion or faith and just go, you know what, I'm just going to go on my own way. So you said with your kids, you're happy for them to decide either way, Christian or Muslim. But what happens if they decided neither? What happens if they said, Dad, you know what, I respect it, but that's just not for me. I don't believe in it. It's not really it's not my gig.
I suppose it'll be, again, it's like with anything with parenthood, it's about having that conversation and kind of trying to understand what their rationale is. Do they feel like they've made an informed decision, or has there been something that's happened to make them think that? Because I remember being a Muslim black male living in London during the height of 9/11, and then the 7/7 bombings. It was a bit of a peak time to be Muslim around that point, and that kind of it really challenges your faith at that point, because people are looking at you. It's bad enough people are looking at you because you're black and you're a man, but when they throw in, oh, your name's Umar, Muslim, yeah. So kind of like start having those other connotations that are attached to it. It becomes a bit of a problem, and I suppose stuff like that will make you kind of challenge or kind of repress your feelings towards that particular religion, because of the way that the rest of society is looking down on you about it. But I think for me, what I've realized is it's about kind of having that strength of conviction and strength of character to be like, you know what, I don't care what anyone else has to say about it. This is what I believe. This is how I feel about it. And if it makes me feel like a much better person and I'm doing good and I'm not harming anyone by having these beliefs, then it's all good. And I think, like I say, for my kids, it's very much like trying to understand, if that was the case, why they felt the way that they felt. And even like, I'm not even, if both my kids decide actually we want to be Christian, I'm not going to sit there and be like, well, why not Islam? Like, it's, that's the informed choice that you've made, I respect that. I'm not going to force you to do something that you don't want to do. And I think because religion has played such a major role in black countries generally, whether it's Islam in Western Africa, Western Northern Africa, whether it's Christianity in the South and East of Africa, it's always been kind of at the root of families and kind of the root of society. So everything kind of revolves around the church or the mosque. So in a way, I'm not surprised that when people have come over to this country, whether it's the Windrush generation or the African generation in the 70s, 80s, they've brought that belief system with them. And again, they've probably leaned on that to help them get through the tough times as well. So, maybe the racism that they would have experienced, maybe the injustices and inequalities that they would have gone through, they would have leaned on God or Allah at those particular junctures to help them get through it. And because they've got through it and they've raised their kids in that way, it's kind of like, well, this is what he's done for me. Because very often, like, I have conversations with my dad and he'll be like, there's a lot of tough times that you don't know about from when you were growing up, a lot of stuff that was going on, but I leaned on God and, he was able to kind of see me through. And when you have those kind of real life experiences and those real life conversations, like, okay, well, I can see that. So religion is just one of those things that it just gets passed down. But again, we're now living in an age where, you've got the super highway of information that is the internet. So therefore, people, children, society can explore so many different things. I've learned about so many other different faiths. Going to school, all I knew was Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, Sikhism, Christianity, and Islam, the 6 religions. As I'm growing up, I'm learning about, Zoroastrian, Baha'i, so many other, faiths and stuff, which I didn't know about growing up because nobody talked about it and nobody was, people were practicing it, but it just wasn't widely known. So, for me, as long as you're not doing something that's harming anyone else, then it's not an issue for me, whichever way you decide to go. But it's just always good to kind of just understand, how you got to that decision, really. And that's it.
Sure. For sure. I wanted to talk about the mental health aspect of dope black dads and being a black dad. I was talking to one of my friends and we were just talking about like mental health and how it's evolved and just like for men. And, obviously the thing is, men in general, we're expected to, or I think we have our own expectations that we, we should solve our own problems, this, that, and the other. There's no point in reaching out and all this kind of nonsense, basically. And that's what we're trying to fight against, right? That's why we have these discussions and so on. But I was talking to my friend and he came up with a kind of an interesting point, which he said, yeah, for sure that's the case. But then he said, like, with black men, there's almost like an added layer. And he said, like, it's almost twofold. He said, like, it depends. So the added layer can be either you're your culture they can often be a lot more traditional. So even like your culture will like then less liberal, and so they won't, your father or your grandfather, whatever it may be, that's just not even a thing. Mental health doesn't even exist.
Yeah.
But then he said the other thing, which I can see, but then he said the other thing which really interested me was that sometimes with racism and the way that like it's so embedded even into our culture that sometimes we can't even see it so much. It's such a part of the matrix that we can't even actually step away and see what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, for example, if you look at like what the stereotype of a black man is, it's like what the stereotype of a man is, but just accentuated times 50. And then like so he started talking about, for example, like if you look at footballers, we all celebrate black footballers. Of course, there's been so many who are amazing, but when we celebrate them, we talk about their physical attributes, right? Yeah. We don't talk about how cerebral they are. Whereas you talk about Dennis Bergkamp, for example, you don't talk about his physical attributes. You talk about what a thinker of the game he was. Yeah. And then we were talking about how that leads into, for example, when a former black player wants to get a football manager job, it's often a lot harder because it's like, yeah, but you were just good because you're like big and strong, not because you're a thinker of the game. Whereas Pep Guardiola, he's a real thinker. He's an ideologue, so he can get the best jobs. And he was saying this, how it kind of all links was he's saying, black men, sometimes we actually believe in that own, like we don't even see it as a form of racism. We're so ingrained in it. We think of ourselves as these like ultra masculine men because that's what we've been told a black man is, we're these super strong, blah, blah, blah. And so for us, it's like we have to kind of step away from the matrix, see that all of that nonsense isn't actually true, that we're just as much of a sentient and thinking being as any other white man or Asian. Some of the best thinkers in the world are black men. Look at Barack Obama. And then from then, we can actually then talk about mental health. But until we kind of realize that we are these thinkers and that we do actually have feelings and that we aren't these brutes, it's almost impossible to even bring in mental health because we don't even realize that that's even a thing ourselves, whether we're from a different generation or whatever. And I was wondering, have you ever thought about that? And how does that how does that kind of, I don't know, how does that play out in Dope Black Dads and with your other, whether they're dads or not, in black men who have problems and maybe don't even realize that they're actually suffering with it themselves?
Yeah, no, I think definitely. I mean, the role of kind of male masculinity and how that plays out, over in society and kind of how society views a black man definitely is something that we've explored a lot of and we continue to explore in Dope Black Dads, because it is this viewpoint that society holds of us because that's what's been perpetuated for so many generations. If you're black and you're an athlete, then, automatically you're going to be the strongest, fastest, hardest hitting person on the field or on the track. And these expectations. And I think black men generally, we're put into one or two categories. Either you're an elite black man or you're a mediocre black man. And it's kind of like there's nothing kind of in between, which is not good because, there's mediocrity everywhere. And sometimes it's okay to be mediocre. There's nothing wrong with that. We don't ever hear about this issue, within white culture to say, there's a lot of mediocre white people that are out there, but you don't often hear people kind of talking about it. And I've experienced that in the workplace where, you'll see somebody who's mediocre and you're thinking, how the hell is this person on a 6-figure salary doing what they're doing? And, they're coasting through life. Whereas, a mediocre black man is probably nowhere near anything like that. And so it's kind of like there's almost this need for society to constantly label black men and kind of put us in these boxes because it kind of doesn't know what to do with us. And you're right in saying that until we start to recognize that actually, as a black man, we have feelings too. Like, we have these burdens that we carry. And again, part of that comes from what has been told to us by parents and previous generations. Part of that is what society has held us up for to be. I've got white friends and I think, I look at them and I'm thinking, I'm pretty sure society hasn't put certain expectations on you to be in a certain job, to be earning a certain amount of money, to be doing X, Y, and Z. This whole concept of what we were talking about before about, you need to be a lawyer, an engineer, a doctor. I don't know how often these conversations take place in white households, for young white men and women as they're growing up. It's a case of very often a lot of them will have freedom of choice, and it feels like being black, you don't necessarily have much freedom of choice. And I think with Dope Black Dads, as you say, part of it is about celebrating, inspiring, healing, and educating black men. And part of the healing part of it is kind of encouraging us to open up a lot more and kind of speak about our vulnerabilities and not be afraid, and kind of creating that safe space, whether it's on Facebook, whether it's on the WhatsApp group, to kind of say, you know what, I feel like rubbish today. I'm feeling down. I don't know what's going on. Help. And I think for so long, what's happening is, as black men, we will have these feelings, but we don't communicate it to anyone. We don't communicate it to our partners. We don't communicate it to our friends. We just kind of bottle it up. And, then it manifests itself in different ways where, you explode because you're angry, or you just go off and you're just trying to compute because you don't know how to deal with it. And I think what I found is, for us as a group, there's power in sharing how you're feeling, because there's that power of people being able to resonate with it in different ways. And you'd be so surprised at how many other black men in the group kind of will feel the same way. Somebody will send a voice note out. And I've done this, I've sent voice notes out where I've literally been crying, and I've sent a voice note out. I would never have done that a couple of years ago because it felt like the done thing to do. But I'd expose my vulnerabilities. I'll allow myself to be vulnerable because I feel I'm in a safe space to be able to do that. I remember just at the end of summer, there was I had a really rough week of it, last week of August, and I just remembered it just felt really tough, and I'd sent a voice note out on the group, and a friend of one of the Dope Black Dads, Chris Becks, who lives out in Melbourne in Australia, he was living in London, and he's out in Australia and probably be setting up the Australian chapter of DBD before long. And unbeknownst to me, he had reached out to the group and said, if people are around, blah, blah, blah. And suddenly, maybe a couple of hours after I sent that note, I'm in the middle of work. Suddenly I get a knock on the door. It's one of the Dope Black Dads. I was like, oh, wow. And it's like, could tell you weren't feeling it. Just wanted to come around, check on you. Like, that's really great. I appreciate it. Just about to go into a hearing because I got caught. Do you mind coming back in a couple of hours if that's all right? And he did. So he went off, he came back, and then literally half an hour later, I had another 5 dads came through, knocked on my door. They came through. We had, we ate 5 guys. Marvin was within that group. He came down. We had burgers and chips, and we were just sitting in my living room. Just obviously, let me make it very clear. This is pre the whole rule of 6 before anyone started playing anything. This is when it was cool in the summer, end of August. You can go back and check the legislation if you don't believe me. But so had these guys that were in my house, and we were just chilling. We were catching jokes, kind of sharing, being vulnerable, and kind of just being able to talk through it. And that for me was the strength of what this brotherhood is about. And I do see it as a brotherhood. I grew up being the eldest child in my household. I had 2 younger sisters, so I never had a brother. So I didn't know what that experience was like, kind of growing up. And I had a decent relationship with my dad, but not to the point where I'd feel like I could talk about mental health in that way, because it's like, well, if you're feeling a bit low, it's just like, just get on with it, because that's what your parents did. But now it's like I've been exposed to a new train of thought, and actually it is okay to be vulnerable. It is okay to express yourself. And that uplift that I had after they had gone was amazing. I felt so great about myself again, because I wouldn't have got that feeling if I hadn't shared in the first place. So I think it's so important to be able to share and express your views and your feelings. And I think the more we start doing that as black men and making it okay and acceptable, and actually as men in general, being able to do that, then I think it kind of will normalize itself in a lot more, because there's a huge mental health agenda that's going on at the moment. People are talking about, let's speak about mental health. And I think once the pandemic is over, the next big pandemic is going to be on mental health. So, let's start talking about it from now, so that when it does happen, we know how to kind of start to deal with it and challenge those notions that men don't talk.
Yeah, for sure. You said a few real interesting things there. I mean, I, from a very early age, luckily, having grown up with these British Nigerian people coming down from London all the way to Lincolnshire, and you could see how differently, even subconsciously, how differently the teachers would treat them, and how excellency it wasn't a choice; it was the only option, because anything else, you were just completely written off. Whereas I, for example, I was always a fairly lazy student. I would try to pull it out the bag last minute. And yet my teachers would almost, because I could do that and they've seen me do it, they would almost semi-allow me to do that. Whereas with my other friends who are black, who had the exact same ability, if they did that, they would just be called out on it straight away. Oh, you're lazy, this, that, and the other. And so when I would talk to them, there's excellency is not an option for us. Like, it is the only option. It's not like we can choose whether we want to be. And it's so interesting for people who think maybe that we're kind of like, or that you're egging this on, or what, that is doing it over the top. It really isn't that way. And what you're saying is exactly right. Like, it really is. You kind of have to be in this world that we live in right now as a black man or black woman. Excellent. Otherwise, completely get written off, and mediocrity as white people is definitely more accepted, for sure it is, which is ridiculous. Like you said, we're humans, so there's going to be mediocre black people, there's going to be bad black people, and there's going to be amazing black people. It's just what it is, just because you're part of the human race, just like any other race. But for some reason, if you want to get anywhere in this world, you have to be excellent. And the other thing you said, which I don't want to name them, but my best friend, he was black Nigerian. He's the one who introduced me into the Nigerian culture, but yet he wasn't what you would class as stereotypically black. He wasn't fast. He didn't play football. He was an aura. He was more effeminate in his mannerisms, and so a much more delicate soul. And what was interesting was, it wasn't necessarily the white people at school being like, "Oh man, you're not even black. Like, what is this? Like, why aren't you rapping every day?" I mean, it wasn't that. It was actually a lot of the black people at boarding school who would give it to him, and they'd be like, "Oh man, you're an Oreo, this, that, and the other." And he found that really hard when he was younger. He's definitely got his weight. He's accepted who he is now, and he's found a great group of people who accept him as well. But when he was younger, he'd have conversations with me about how he felt like he was kind of letting the black side down, or whatever it was, because he didn't live up to these stereotypes that were even held within his black friends. Do you know what I mean? And I was like, oh, that again. White people don't like. I empathize with him because I saw it happen, but I can only empathize to a certain level, because that's never ever going to happen in a white group of friends. Like, oh man, what are you doing? You're acting too black. Like, that doesn't make sense. We would never say that to someone, because as a white person, you have the liberty to be whoever you want to be. And interesting to see how actually it wasn't necessarily white people trying to put my friend in a box. It was actually some other black people who were trying to do it to him.
I can definitely relate to that, because I remember when I was in secondary school, like, garage was, we're talking in the late 90s, early 2000s. So, garage was the big thing. For me, I was like, I'm not really feeling this. Like, it's just, now I love it. Well, I love it. Put on So Solid Crew and I'll be up there. But back then, it just wasn't for me. And actually, the circles that I was moving in, people were listening to like Limp Bizkit, Korn, Linkin Park, Metallica, that type of thing. And I really love that music. And even now, I still like, people get surprised. Wow, you like Metallica? I'm like, yeah, black people can enjoy rock music as well. It's not, an exclusive genre to white people, in the same way that I don't ever say that grime is exclusively a black thing. I know lots of white people that love Stormzy, that love Kano, and that's cool as well. And I think I used to battle a lot of that stereotype, because I think it's partly to do with, growing up in East London and having a dad that used to work for the BBC World Service. And I think he was trying to almost, I suppose I spoke much better than a lot of my counterparts did. So I didn't really sound like I was from East London, although I could do if the situation called for it. So I think it kind of felt, it's weird because I never felt picked on as such, but there definitely was those subtleties. And I remember when I got to university, it was a lot more apparent there because I point blank refused to join the African Caribbean societies for the first couple of years of my time there because I was just like, I don't want to be pigeonholed as because I'm black and I go to a university where black people are a minority, that this is where I need to kind of lay my hat. Because I grew up living in Newham, which is one of the most diverse boroughs in the whole of Europe, meant that my circle of friends was diverse as well. So, I had friends that were Indian, that were Chinese, that were black, that were white. So for me, the whole concept of just sticking with one particular group of people was an alien concept to me because that's not how I kind of grew up. And it's only because I became president of the Law Society in my final year and I was kind of reaching out and kind of engaging with other people that then, I started to get a bit more involved with the ACS society. But even then, I still felt like a bit of an outsider looking in because it just felt like, okay, I'm maybe not as, I felt like my blackness was challenged quite a lot because I was still liking, some of my new metal music. Yes, I was liking R&B and hip hop, but maybe not as much as the next guy. I remember I dated a Ghanaian girl when I was at uni, and I suppose that's when my blackness, in inverted commas, was topped up in that sense. So I think it's definitely interesting, and I think there's a lot of issues that can happen within like the black community itself, and sometimes you have it with Africans and Caribbeans and kind of the rivalries that go on there and everything that kind of comes along with that. And I think people will see you in a particular way, and I think people will kind of take me for however they want to take me. I'm somebody that I love my hip hop and I love my grime, but I also love R&B and I love pop music, and I'm not ashamed to say any of that. So it is what it is, and it is kind of part of what makes me who I am, really. So it's all good.
Yeah, personally, it took me a long time to fully accept that I love pop music as well. So
I kept going to cheap nights at uni, so it's just like, okay, yeah, clearly I like this stuff. So
there we go. Nothing wrong with it.
Exactly. It must be quite wild for you now, though, to see, like, on the flip side, to see loads of white people now, like, absolutely love Afrobeat and all of that jazz. And you're in for it. Like, I have, like, an African playlist, like, traditional African music, and I can't understand a word they're saying, obviously, but I lose myself in it. And I always think, like, I wonder what would happen if, like, some guy who actually understood the music would see me listen to this and, like, dancing in my own stupid way and just, like, have a little chuckle to themselves, like, wow, we have come far in reality.
Definitely. It's all good. And I think, I say, you know what you like. There's no hard and fast rule in saying, this belongs to this culture, this belongs to that culture. And actually, if the music is good, if the beats are good, I don't care. Like, I don't care where it's from. I like it. It's not, I'm not going to not like something just because it doesn't have an ounce of blackness to it. Because I just think that's just stupid. The world has changed, so you are exposed to so much more now than you ever were before.
For sure. And I think one of the great things as well, like, that I think African cultures are doing a lot better is actually selling or exporting their culture, so to speak. So, for example, it sounds stupid, but as an Italian, I go down any street and I know I'm going to see an Italian restaurant. That's just facts. Mm-hmm. Whether it's a good Italian or not, that's a different story. But I know that they will be trying to pretend to be Italian. Jim knows that if he sees any pub, they're guaranteed going to have a 4-leaf clover and a Guinness sign outside of it. That's just how it is. But, like, and what I've seen now, especially in London, obviously, but kind of actually branching out from London, it's happening in places where you wouldn't expect it. Are Nigerian restaurants, Senegalese restaurants, and this, that, and the other. And what's beautiful that I think is that they're not populated by Nigerian or Senegalese customers exclusively.
Yeah.
Right. You will see a ginger person in there chowing down on some jollof rice or egusi soup. And it's like that beautiful thing to see, because it's like, then you really, I think you get an appreciation for the culture, and you can actually start to understand people more and see them as like, oh, Umar, like he's from Nigeria, and in Nigeria they eat this stuff. Whereas rather than being like, oh, Umar's from Nigeria, where's Nigeria? It's in Africa, isn't it, somewhere? Like where? And they don't have any idea or any understand it. And I think like, I've seen a lot of it in the last like maybe 5 years, and I'm even talking about, I live in Spain and I've seen it. Like there's a whole borough in Spain where, like, in Madrid, and it's full of like all these different African restaurants from different countries, and they're telling you there's a lot of Spanish people going in there, and it's a great thing to see, I think.
Definitely, and I think food is something that brings people together as well. It's kind of that understanding of other people's cultures and that kind of appreciation of good food. And I think if the food is made right, you're gonna appreciate it. And probably the reason why you ain't seen a lot of Senegalese and Nigerians in these restaurants is because we're in your Italian restaurants or your there's that mutual appreciation. Because me personally, to be honest, if I'm going to be going out, I probably won't go to a Nigerian restaurant as such, because I want to. There's so much other options out there.
Of course.
Off rice, then usually my wife will make it, and and I'm not just saying this because she's my wife, but it's not my favorite jollof rice. So it's like, why am I going to go eat it somewhere else when it's not going to come up to the standards that my wife makes it at? So it's one of those things, and like I say, you want to experience other foods and other cultures, so whether it's Japanese, Turkish. I love Middle Eastern food because I just love everything about that culture. So for me, it's like, that's what I would tend to gravitate towards. So, but yeah, I think it's great to see that things are changing, and and I like hearing the fact that it's exploding outside of the UK as well. Hearing about it happening in Spain, and I'm sure it's happening in a lot of other countries as well. And actually, I know, like in Nigeria, we're suddenly seeing a large amount of like American or British style restaurants that are now gravitating towards that way, because I don't think there's a McDonald's actually in Nigeria. It's probably one of the few places in the world that doesn't have.
They should keep it like that. Please keep it like that.
It's actually, I think it's one of the few places, but it's kind of like, they're starting to, especially because you're now getting a large expat community that are coming back. So, they want some of those creature comforts that they've been used to in America or in the UK. So you are starting to see a lot of those restaurants now making their way across to Nigeria and other West African countries as well. So I think sharing is caring, for sure.
Absolutely. Umar, man, it's been such a wonderful conversation. And just before I close, it wouldn't be an Earthly Delights podcast if I didn't ask a final 2-part question.
Yes.
The first part of the question is, I wanted to know, if I'm sure you have, but if you haven't, it would be cool to peruse it with us. What was like the biggest revelation that you have come across since being part of Dope Black Dads, or what is the greatest thing that you've learned? And the second thing is, we want to hear like plans for the future for Dope Black Lads. You mentioned that perhaps your friend is starting it in Australia. We'd love to hear about that.
Yeah. So I think for me, the biggest revelation has been that brotherhood element, and actually being part of something where you've got so many other black men, black fathers that are in the same or similar position as you, and having that kind of shared experience. So a lot of these dads I've never met. I don't know. All I know is the conversations that we've had on WhatsApp or on Facebook, or when we've had our sharing calls. And I think for me, the one thing that probably stands out the most is what happened, like I said, a couple of weeks ago, when I was feeling super low, and suddenly 6 dads turn up to my house, and they come and see you. And that to me is kind of like, that's the strength of brotherhood right there. We've got a situation where one guy, is having issues with employment at the moment, and he needs money to get a solicitor. He can't afford it. Set up a fundraising page. We've all donated. He's hit the target. He's going off. He's going to get sorted. That to me is what Dope Black Dads is about. That's what it's about, the brotherhood. And it's kind of like, we're recognizing when we're having times of need. As a brotherhood, we're coming out and we're batting for each other. We're not trying to knock each other down. We're trying to lift each other up. We're trying to keep each other up, because ultimately, we want to make sure that we are demonstrating and we are active and great fathers to our children's lives, whether we are with our partners, whether we're separated, no matter what the situation is, that we are doing exactly the best that we can for our kids. And ultimately that starts from us. You know, if we're the best version of ourselves, then we'll be able to be the best dads possible to our children. In terms of what's going to happen in the future, you know, we're here, there and everywhere right now. You know, we're doing lots of stuff on Facebook at the moment. You know, it's been obviously Black History Month, so we've been doing lots of different talks around that. We're part of the Dope Black CIC as well, so that's charitable company that incorporates the other aspects of Dope Black. So you've got Dope Black Mums, Dope Black Women, and Dope Black men, and also Dope Black Queers as well, which launched about a month ago now. Wow. So, you know, we're branching into so many different things. So it's kind of like we're expanding that conversation. We're basically saying, listen, we're not just limited. It's not just a conversation about dads. You know, the mums are doing fantastic work. I know that, you know, they do their weekly podcast, same as we do. You know, the men are just getting going, the women, you know, being led fantastically as well, and the Dope Black Queer section as well. So it's kind of like we're expanding our reach, and we're kind of demonstrating there are different elements to being Black. So it's not just being about a father or a mother. You know, there's the LGBT community, there are men, there are women, and we're kind of like, I suppose, spreading our reach as far as we possibly can. And hopefully, it's been obviously a tough year because of the pandemic for a variety of reasons, but that hasn't stopped our growth in any way, shape, or form. If anything, we've learned how to adapt, and you know, we've kind of strengthened our community through this pandemic. And hopefully, once we are back in having that ability to meet face to face again, you know, you'll definitely be hearing lots more about the work that we're doing as a community, as a group, as an organisation in the wider community for many more years to come.
That's great,
man. That's fantastic, isn't it? That's fantastic. Like, I think that it kind of brings the you know, the expression is it takes a village to bring up a child. I feel like we can maybe even expand that to be like, it takes a village to maintain a healthy mind in a man, human, or man, woman, or child, you know. But yeah, I think that expanding out and that brotherhood that you said is such a valuable thing. Before we let you go, Umar, you've kind of spoken on it a bit there, but how do you keep on top of your mental health? What are your top tips that maybe someone listening can kind of try and incorporate into their lives?
So I would say, I mean, one thing I like to do, keep a journal. So, you know, if you can do like a daily journal, I've got like an electronic version. So kind of just keeping a tab on like how I'm feeling, anything that's happened, good or bad, throughout the day. Exercise, 100% is key. You know, I've lost a few stone since the start of this pandemic. And that's because, you know, I took up the couch to 5K just before the pandemic actually kicked in. And now I'm, you know, quite comfortably running 10, 15 Ks,
Beautiful.
You know, 3-4 times in a week. So, you know, and that for me, running is my therapy in terms of getting out on the open road, first thing in the morning, headphones on, whether I'm listening to a podcast or listening to some music, and just kind of going for it. And that to me helps to clear up my head and, you know, and everything that's going on, and kind of lets me set myself straight. And also talking. You know, it's so important to talk, and it's so important to share, you know, how you're feeling, no matter how minuscule you might think it is. You know, when somebody asks how you doing, if you know you're not okay, don't just say, yeah, I'm okay, and kind of leave it at that. You know, just, yeah, I'm feeling a bit rubbish today. And there's nothing wrong with that, and kind of taking ownership of that. I used to be guilty of not saying that's how I felt. I'd be like, yeah, I'm okay. But then actually my demeanor and everything around me would suggest otherwise. Now it's like, you know what, I'm not okay because I'm tired. You know, I had a rubbish night's sleep, so I just feel like crap, and you know, I'm just going to need a minute. Or, you know, I'm not good because I'm quite stressed out because of work. But just kind of expanding on that. You know, you're not necessarily asking for that person to provide you a solution. You know, that's not necessarily what it's about. It's just about you having that ability to share, this is how I feel. And through doing that, you know, people say a problem shared is a problem halved. And it's true, because that person that you're sharing with, whether it's your partner, whether it's your friend, family member, they might be able to give you some words of advice that could help that situation that if you'd never shared, you'd probably still be running through it in your head. So those are my top three. So, journaling, exercising, sharing.
Beautiful stuff. And for anyone who's listened to this who wants to get involved with Dope Black Dads or find out some more information, you've got a website. Can you just tell them like the link? We'll put them in the show notes anyway, but the link so that they can find out all your social media and all that jazz.
Yeah, so if you go on www.dopeblackdads.com, you'll find us there. If you type in Dope Black Dads, you will find us on every single social media platform. So we're on Insta, we're on Twitter, we're on LinkedIn, and we're on Facebook. So, if you're somebody who's a Black father that wants to get involved, just hit us up on our Facebook group, and you can, there's a few questions to answer and you'll be let into the group and you can, come and be part of the community. And for those that are not Black, that doesn't mean that you can't be allies in helping to kind of further the cause or anything like that. So, please do join us. Please do support what we're trying to do. Because at the end of the day, we are trying to change a narrative. We are trying to, we're celebrating Black fathers. We're inspiring Black fathers. We're healing and we're educating. And that's very much what Dope Black Dads is all about.
Beautiful
I'm glad you said that, Umar, because it is very important that it's not just Black dads that are listening to the podcast or tuning in. It is important for white people to check in and go, oh, okay, I completely missed that. I completely, through whatever way, I didn't. And now, looking forward, I can see it from this perspective or whatnot. And that's what me and Seb hope that we can do anyway. It is.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, that's why we reached out. Do you know what I mean? I think Jim and I are fully aware that we're not Black, but we can. But if our listeners, we know that most of our listeners are white, and yet we still felt that it was important to have you on and for you to tell your story and the Dope Black Dad story, because, like Jim said, it's just opening. Sometimes I think all it is just opening someone's eyes to a certain situation that maybe they'd never even thought about or had the opportunity to kind of become aware. And now hopefully with this conversation, and if they go onto your website, which I've been on, which has so much information on there, then they can find out more, and then maybe that might help them understand one of their friends more or whatever it may be. Do you know what I mean? I think it's all about that and understanding that Black, white, whatever the case may be, we're all human, and we can learn from each other. I think that's what we're trying to hope to do with this anyway.
Definitely. And I think, I hope that I'm able to dispel some of the myths that people may have, or some of the kind of preconceptions that people might have about, being a Black male or being a Black father and what that actually means, or even just fatherhood in general. It's so important that, there's so many like mums podcasts that are out there. And obviously with Dope Black Dads, we have got a podcast. I forgot to plug that. You can find us on all relevant podcast channels, Spotify, etc. And it's so important that we have these conversations, and, please tune in to our podcast, listen in, because we do give those real insights. And it's very much real men who are involved in real life situations. We are parents, we are professionals, we are husbands, we are boyfriends, we are partners, we're all of that. And we kind of touch upon so many different issues on a week-to-week basis. So, if anything, at least listen to the podcast and, learn some more from that. And I hope that I've given you a little bit of a snippet of what we're about and what we do.
Oh, for sure. And the podcast is top. So anyone who's listening who hasn't listened before, please go listen. It's not just about dads. Look, I'm not a dad. At least I hope not. But and I've listened to some great conversations on there. So it's great stuff for anyone who wants to go listen to that. But for now, Umar, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it, and we hope to speak soon.
Definitely. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks a million.
Hi guys, thank you for listening to the podcast. Please don't forget to subscribe and leave a 5-star review if you haven't already. Every review helps us climb the podcast charts so that even more of you can listen to our amazing guests. We really appreciate the support. Remember to tune in next week, but until then, keep safe and have a good one.